Well, we move on, though, to, I guess, the film that made Quentin Tarantino really, I mean, Reservoir Dogs was his calling card, but his next film is what kind of really cemented him, isn't it? It's a strange thing that one of the characteristics of Quentin Tarantino's style that so many people list is non-linear storytelling, despite only 1/3 of his films having such a structure. Some identify the Hateful Eight thusly, though those people are wrong and would do well to seek out a definition of flashback and how this differs immensely. But I digress. And I suspect much of that has to do with Pulp Fiction, whose 3 intersecting main storylines are told out of chronological order. Said 3 storylines are those of hitmen Jules Winfield, Samuel L. Jackson, and Vincent Vega, John Travolta, and aging boxer Butch Coolidge, Bruce Willis, back when he cared about acting, which was nice, and which intersect in location and character, with the film beginning with the end of Jules' story and near the end of Butch and Vincent's. The disrupted narrative makes it rather difficult to summarise, but the most important points are that a near-death experience causes Jules to consider ending his criminal career, while a decision by Butch not to deliberately lose a boxing match puts him in the sights of Vincent, as directed by Vincent and Jules' boss, the gangster Marcellus Wallace, played by Ving Rhames. These are threads that loosely link a series of vignettes that include a dance contest, an LA set deliverance homage, an armed robbery, a drug overdose, and rather grisly car cleaning, all set to a, unsurprisingly, great soundtrack and dialogue about, amongst other things, the regional naming of hamburgers. It probably shouldn't work, yet it does, and it's full of memorable moments, characters and lines. Who can forget the efficiency of Harvey Keitel's Wolf? Or, sadly, his reprisal of that role in Direct Line insurance adverts. Samuel L. Jackson's Ezekiel 25:17 monologue, or Bruce Willis's evocation that Zed's dead, baby, Zed's dead. It made Tarantino. It resurrected John Travolta's career, at least for a while. Being known before then for dancing and talking babies, and after for Cthulhu, Xanadu, Xanthan Gum? Something like that. You know what I'm talking about. And cemented Sam Jackson as well. Sam Jackson. However, watching all of Mr. Tarantino's films in such close proximity has served to fully crystallise the realisation that there really is nothing below the surface of his films. And as Scott mentioned earlier, he used the phrase I almost used, which is all surface, no feeling. This film's title card defines for us the noun pulp as 1. A soft, moist, shapeless mass of matter. 2. A magazine or book containing lurid subject matter and being characteristically printed on rough, unfinished paper. The films are too slick and too polished for the rough or unfinished aspects to hold true. But as for the rest, every film that Quentin Tarantino has made is a Pulp Fiction. They say nothing. They critique nothing. Watching these films again, I strove to find meaning, looking for, perhaps, an acknowledgement of the artifice of the medium of cinema in the conspicuous black and white rear projection behind Vincent Vega's car as he drives through Los Angeles. Or perhaps a commentary in Jimmy's, Tarantino's own character here, very free use of that particularly odious racial epithet, yet having a black wife. But it's simply not there. What you see is what you get with Tarantino. Mr. Tarantino is a pop singer who makes lightweight confections that entertain, but, well, I wouldn't say never satisfy, but sometimes you just want more. And they do entertain, but there's a real curiosity to me why he's quite so feted in cineast circles, and quite so highly regarded at, for example, Cannes. He's a storyteller, and rightly lauded for his most characteristic skill, his dialogue, which, while often little resembling anything any human might actually say, is usually great, and in the mouth of the right actor, absolutely sings. For example, here, via the inimitable Samuel L. Jackson, or with Christoph Waltz in Django Unchained, which I'd argue is its pinnacle. That his films are more often than not entertaining, like personality, goes a long way. But Pulp Fiction, more so than Reservoir Dogs, appears now as a mission statement for Tarantino's oeuvre. Not a template. His works, while often bearing similarities, are nevertheless too dissimilar to be simply formulaic, but a philosophical and tonal outline that he hasn't strayed much from since. It's still awfully good, though.
Yeah, I would say everything that I said about Reservoir Dogs about Pulp Fiction. It's basically Reservoir Dogs plus plus. It's Reservoir Dogs, but a bit more so. Everything is just that bit cooler. That's that a bit more, perhaps a bit more entertaining. It's probably got less heart to it, just purely because you can't really get into any kind of conflict between the characters. The way that this is set up, and the way that it jumps around, and the way that it's clearly more focused on entertaining than creating anything deeper. But it still all works, and it's still a great deal of fun. Ultimately, again, that's what you come to Tarantino for. Certainly by this point, looking back at it, you come to Tarantino for a fun time and nothing more, and that's again what he delivers with Pulp Fiction.
I wouldn't have a lot to add to that. I think I was surprised watching this again recently, because for the first time in like 15 years probably, that this has mellowed with age somewhat. I think at the time, I recall this being so edgy and like so. It felt a lot more brutish and like some sort of mission statement. But coming back now after such a long period and reviewing it, I was surprised at how more mellow it seemed actually, and I was never convinced at the time about the argument that was made about how this non-linear chronology was sort of rewriting the rule book of cinema. I didn't buy it then, and I still really don't buy it now in retrospect either. I'm not sure that was as groundbreaking as was being hailed, but it is just a pure piece of entertainment, and I think it's a great showcase for the fact that character and dialogue are enough if you're telling an interesting enough story, and if you make your characters interesting enough, and you are capable of crafting dialogue that, while maybe not always so natural, and maybe could be accused of being particularly self-aware, is still certainly engaging and interesting. And if he is a pop filmmaker, then I think that the reason that he is so successful and revered in places like Cannes is because I think he makes pop cinema about as well as it can be made. And I think you're right. I don't think there is, as we'll go through here, I think we'll be hard pushed to find a film that really has much to say about anything beyond its characters and their interaction. I don't think there are any great life lessons to be learned from Tarantino. There are no Instagram posts of #SoTrue to be made from any of the pearls of wisdom he has to give us. But sometimes it's enough for a film just to be enjoyable, and there's just something about the way that he crafts these experiences which makes it, like you say, Scott, plus plus. So I wasn't disappointed to return to Pulp Fiction. It doesn't feel as seismic now as it felt then, certainly. And again, much like Reservoir Dogs, in fact, possibly more so, Pulp Fiction was just like a cross-cultural phenomenon. Again, it's really weird to think back now and objectively view with that distance between us and the moment now what a sort of sensation it was and how much people spoke about it. And I mean, even now people will quote that film, and everybody knows what your reference is when you do that. But the one thing I do wonder about is, I think when my kids get older, is there enough in films like Pulp Fiction to sustain their interest? Are they going to be as curious about stuff like this, and is it going to feel as relevant and culturally appropriate to them as it did to us at the time? I'm not sure about the longevity of some of these films in that respect, but certainly in the moment, I think I enjoy Pulp Fiction as much now for the nostalgia that it evokes as I did as a piece of movie making back then, if that makes sense. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, because it has been a good sort of 15 years, and it wasn't this sort of, not train wreck, it was never going to be a train wreck, but nothing stuck out to me as being particularly irrelevant or having aged particularly badly about it.
No, I didn't actually have a feeling of nostalgia watching this, which is good. It's not what I was looking for from watching these. I was like, see whether, like,
no,
basically, do I still enjoy them?
Yeah.
Although, like, I think we're all agreed then, he's a pop artist, he's a pop cinema director.
Oh yeah.
But has, like, you know, he's the pinnacle of that, I guess. But again, it leaves me slightly dissatisfied because sometimes I just want a bit more from a film. You know, you normally don't watch a director's entire output in a week. You know, if they wonder that, it's like it's partly my fault for having kind of compressed that for this podcast. But when you say, Craig, too, about whether it's going to be like relevant in the future for your kids or something, like that's always the danger with anything pop. I think that they might not just hang around. That said, I mean, this is 26 years after Pulp Fiction came out.
Something like that.
It's 1994, isn't it? So yeah, 26
We
years.
have to talk about things we remember in our youth as being a quarter century old now.
Yes, it's frightening, isn't it? But it's still very entertaining. The dialogue's still great because the dialogue is timeless. Is a difficult word to use, but it doesn't feel like the dialogue particularly sets it in any one era.
Yes,
I guess that's kind of a definition of timeless, but you know, it's
it's not referring to TikTok on the main or anything like that.
no, and because so much of the settings call back to the 50s anyway, and like visual reference to like 1950s, 1960s films and how Vincent and Jules dress and stuff, that it was already kind of slightly out of time anyhow. So then that might help make it lasting.
Yeah.
The other point I wanted to mention to what you said was, give me a second, it'll come back to me.
That's all right. I'll fill for you. The one thing that I think has perhaps aged a bit about this, and it's easier to see now in retrospect, is actually how hard the dialogue is trying, how self-conscious the dialogue is about trying really hard to be cool. And I don't think Pulp Fiction has aged the worst in that respect. I think it might be perhaps the biggest offender, but I don't think it sticks out quite so much as it might do in a couple of other films coming up that we'll talk about. But I didn't cringe, but there were a couple of moments watching this back where I thought, yeah, that kind of takes me out of the film a bit, because you're perhaps trying a little bit too hard with the dialogue there. But I think that's one of the things that's certainly improved with this guy's work over time. And when we get into the back nine on this podcast, then I think we will. There are certainly examples I could give that I think I appreciate his writing style more latterly than I do now, going back and watching some of these earlier films.
I think actually what I was about the dialogue was probably what you were talking about. It felt like it had mellowed a bit. So I wonder, like, what didn't feel quite as raw or impactful. Like, I don't know whether that's time and experience in a changing world, or whether it's simply because as we were discussing earlier, Tarantino himself and his style has had so much impact. Whether his own film, and this is what I suspect it is that his own films aren't quite as impactful as they are, because like they've had it's had a quarter of a century now for them to have so much impact on everything else that's come up. Not everything, but a lot of other things that have come out since.
Yeah.
A couple of things I wanted to mention that are nothing to do with critique or anything like that. Just I feel like I want to mention them. First of all, I have changed a lot because I'm watching Pulp Fiction now, and the scene where just before Mia Wallace is about to have her heroin overdose, and I'm spending most of my time looking at her reel-to-reel tape recording, wondering if it's on one of the nice ones that was on Tecmon or not. I'm a weird person. Second thing, how quaint is it that somebody can go into a restaurant in Los Angeles, of all cities, and think that a $5 shake's expensive? Oh, how quaint. Remember when you could buy stuff for not a lot of money? Wasn't that wonderful?
We're so old.